Our story begins on Coruscant, as Anakin Skywalker is in his Jedi Temple quarters, moving a training ball around that he borrowed from the training halls, around the room with the Force, just playing a game of catch with himself. He was rather bored. It wasn't often during this war that Anakin had time fully to himself. But Padme was off-world, giving a diplomatic speech to neutral systems. Ahsoka was out with a group of Padawans, on a training moon, doing something Anakin didn't think was all that valuable, and Obi Wan was on his own personal mission to Mandalore. Anakin wished that Obi Wan would have brought him with, but before going on this mission, Obi Wan came to him, discreetly asking Anakin if he could borrow the Twilight ship. Anakin quickly learned that Obi Wan was going on an unsanctioned, unapproved mission to Mandalore to help out his girlfriend, and so Anakin didn't hesitate to help. He just wished that Obi Wan would have let him go with. The two of them weren't meant to be separated, but Anakin could hardly be mad. If he were going on a mission to save Padme, he surely would not have told Obi-Wan or anyone else the truth of it all. So Anakin just sat in his room, tossing the ball around, until his communicator was beeping. He was being called to the Temple Communications Tower for an urgent update. Anakin got up, smiling to himself, wondering if the Council plans on punishing Kenobi for disobeying their direct orders not to go to Mandalore. Either way, he was excited to talk to his best friend about all of it. He hurried through the halls, passing by many Jedi who gave him a smile. Anakin was smiling and waving back to them. Things felt quite good, and Anakin wondered if he needed to take more time to just sit back and relax once in a while. This was nice. But things would begin to change drastically as he entered the elevator for the communications tower. There was a shift in the Force, and as the doors opened, everyone was silent. Yoda looked to Anakin, telling him to come in. The Council has just learned of Obi-Wan's trip to Mandalore, and things became much more complicated than any of them could have expected. Anakin didn't understand. He told Yoda that he would like to speak to Obi-Wan about all of this, but Ki-Adi-Mundi spoke up, telling Anakin that will not be possible. Anakin felt like he was going to collapse. What was going on? Was Obi-Wan captured? Why were the Jedi being so strange? And then, Shaak Ti turned on the comms table, playing a message that the Jedi just received from Mandalore. It came from a woman called Bo-Katan Kryze, and she sent the following message. To the Republic, and to the Jedi Council, my name is Bo-Katan Kryze, and I've come to you today with a deeply unfortunate message. I was part of a group known as Death Watch, a Mandalorian sect that wanted to go back to the traditional warrior ways. Unfortunately, our sect was taken over by the former Sith known as Darth Maul. I and a few others from Death Watch chose to leave the group and fight back against Maul, but his secret takeover soon resulted in the capture of my sister, Duchess Satine, and it turns out it was all a plan to draw out Jedi Master Obi-Wan Kenobi. Bo-Katan took a deep breath before continuing, and she said, Maul has been defeated, his rule is at an end, but Maul took the life of her sister, Satine, and in the fight for Mandalore, both Maul and Obi-Wan Kenobi have fallen. Bo said that Obi-Wan's body is being prepared to be sent home to Coruscant, and she thanked the Council for sending Kenobi to their aid. He did not die in vain. He was successful. The message would end, and Anakin had to grab onto the table. He took a moment, gathering his thoughts, and then looked to the rest of the Jedi, saying they must send a rescue team to Mandalore. Obi-Wan is still alive. He has to be. He needs their help. Mundi, Yoda, and Shaak Ti would all look to each other, and Mundi said they've seen Kenobi's body before Anakin arrived. He is gone. He died in the fight with Maul. Both of them died. Anakin just shook his head. He said he will organize a team to go to Mandalore. He turned toward the doorway, but in just a few steps, all of it came crashing down. Anakin knew the truth. He could feel it. There was a deep wound in the Force, where Obi-Wan's presence should be, and Anakin would fall to his knees, tears streaming down his face. It was Shaak Ti who came over, helping Anakin up, but Anakin just brushed her off, telling Yoda and the Council that this is their fault for telling Obi-Wan that he couldn't go to save her. Anakin stormed out of the room. Shaak Ti moved to follow him, but Yoda told her to stop. Anakin must find his center in this moment. This is a true test for him as a Jedi. Mundi would ask Yoda if he truly believes that Anakin can overcome this, and Yoda sighed, admitting he is not sure. Yoda said that Obi-Wan was one of the best Jedi, one of the best people he's ever known in his many years as a Jedi, and he will soon be honored with a full funeral. Around 24 hours later, Anakin Skywalker and Ahsoka Tano were landing on Mandalore together. Over the last day, Anakin hasn't slept. He certainly hasn't allowed himself to feel much of anything. After storming out of the tower, Anakin did what he did best, hiding his real, raw emotions under hundreds of layers deep inside of himself. He put up the front of being the stoic warrior of the Clone Wars, and he decided that more investigation must be done, and he would use Ahsoka's developing psychometry to find out the truth. As they entered Mandalore, Ahsoka didn't know what to say. When she found out what happened, she immediately went to Anakin, only to find him in the temple training halls, going up against a few droids. Anakin had given her a simple smile, asking her to come to Mandalore with him. She agreed, wanting to do anything she could to help, but it was almost creepy, the way that Anakin was seemingly ignoring everything that has happened. But Anakin would bring her to the area just outside of the palace where Obi Wan was killed, and the two of them would get to work. Ahsoka would try to use the Force to use psychometry, but she was still in the early stages of learning this power. If done right, she would be able to see an echo from the Force, showing her what has happened here. She would place her hand to the floor, and for hours, there was nothing working. The Force was not coming to her. Ahsoka eventually told Anakin that they should go. Obi-Wan's funeral is later tonight, and they shouldn't miss it. But Anakin just said it's not important right now, and she needs to keep trying. There is a truth here that he must understand. So, Ahsoka would put everything she had into this, and finally, after a while longer, she would find the right spot in the room to access this power, and Ahsoka would see the echo from the Force. She described it to Anakin as she saw it. Obi-Wan was down here fighting both Maul and the Zabrak warrior known as Savage. Kenobi took them on when Bo-Katan and her fighters came to free him, and Ahsoka watched as Kenobi disarmed both Savage and Maul in a smooth swing, remaining calm even after watching Satine die in front of him. Obi-Wan completed his final series of moves, stabbing Savage, then stabbing Maul. Both of the brothers fell to the ground defeated. Anakin shook his head. He said that can't be right, unless maybe Obi-Wan is still alive. But Ahsoka began to shiver while feeling this echo. Someone else was here. She watched Obi-Wan turn towards a hooded man who blasted lightning into the exhausted Jedi, then pulled Kenobi forward into his own red blade. The hooded man would laugh with glee as Kenobi fell dead next to Maul and Savage. Ahsoka would break free of the memory, breathing heavily. Anakin would help her up, apologizing for having to put her through that, but they've just learned something no one else knew. Obi-Wan won the fight. Someone else came here, finishing him off. Anakin could only think of one possible name: Sidious. He would feel immense anger in this moment, and he swore to himself, Darth Sidious, whoever he may be, will pay for this. Hours later, Anakin and Ahsoka were indeed back on Coruscant, just in time for the funeral, and as they entered the temple gates, they would find Chancellor Palpatine speaking with Yoda and a few senators. Palpatine excused himself, coming over to Anakin and expressing just how sorry he is for him. He cannot imagine the pain, the anguish that Anakin is going through. He knows how close he and Kenobi were, and even as Jedi, they seemed like brothers. Anakin had to hold back tears as Palpatine gave him a hug, saying that Maul was a monster, and at least they can now live in peace, knowing that Obi-Wan took Maul down with him. Anakin just nodded, not wanting to reveal anything else to anyone just yet. Anakin was then called over to Padme and Ahsoka, leaving Palpatine alone. He was, of course, the one who killed Obi-Wan, but there's no way Anakin should know it was him, he thought. The Dark Lord had sensed Maul's growing power and influence, so he traveled to Mandalore to kill him, only to find that Obi-Wan has done the job for him. But Palpatine saw an opportunity in that moment to push Anakin into the dark, so he killed Kenobi and disappeared without a trace. Or so he thought. And after greeting Padme, Anakin would take his spot next to Padme and Ahsoka as the funeral got underway. Weirdly enough, this was the second funeral for Kenobi in this war, but this one was real. Anakin was still unstable, but there was something oddly comforting about knowing that there was a greater truth and mystery out there, the truth that Kenobi's killer is still out there. Anakin looked around the room, seeing Yoda, Windu, the rest of the council, Ahsoka, Padme, Palpatine, senators, Jedi, and also a convoy from Mandalore. Obi-Wan had made some real friends in his time there with Qui-Gon and during the war, and among the group was a young boy named Corky Kryze. Anakin had seen a few images of Obi-Wan in his earliest years as a Jedi Padawan, and it was remarkable just how similar this boy looked to a younger Obi Wan. Anakin smiled to himself for the first time in a while, imagining a reality where Obi Wan was a father, while also trying to train him. It would have been rather amusing. But soon the funeral would end, and everyone was enjoying some refreshments in the temple hall. But Anakin would say his personal goodbyes, going alone back to his own room. He hadn't slept in a few days, and the emotions of the funeral were making him exhausted. But even with the exhaustion, Anakin had trouble falling asleep. None of this seemed real. Obi-Wan should still be alive. Anakin looked deep inside of himself, realizing he was not ready to move on. Yes, he was promoted to Jedi Knight. Yes, he was training his own Padawan. But still, even when the Master and Padawan relationship between Skywalker and Kenobi ended, they seemed to only get closer, especially as the war got more brutal, and they relied on each other for normalcy. Eventually, all of these mixed emotions would go away, and Anakin would drift asleep, but not long after, he was woken up by a voice calling out to him. It was familiar, but Anakin could not quite place it. The voice was echoing through the temple, and at this point, it was deep into the night. Most of the Jedi here were asleep or in their own rooms, but Anakin seemed to be the only one who could hear this voice. It didn't sound like anyone in particular, just familiar. He followed it through the halls, still not even sure if he was awake, or if this was some sort of dream, but the voice called him down to the Jedi Temple Archives room. There were a few Jedi up late, studying or researching who knows what, and they were far too busy to notice Anakin walking through the area. Anakin would be taken to the door of the restricted archive section. This restricted area was an area that Anakin had always wondered about. The secrets behind this door mystified him. He sometimes wondered how difficult it would be to find a way to sneak inside. But today, as Anakin stood by the door, the control panel beeped, and the door slid open without Anakin needing to do anything. He just kept on following whatever this was, making his way inside, and there would be a file near the back of the section that was beeping in a light blue flash. Anakin would ignore everything else, and he would find a file under Obi-Wan's name. Anakin picked it up, and he turned it on, and to his great surprise, a hologram of Obi-Wan himself was looking into a data holocron. Anakin didn't understand what he was looking at, but this hologram was just of Obi-Wan, and it was a hologram of him looking right at Anakin. He was sitting in his personal quarters, awkwardly just talking to himself. Obi-Wan's hologram said that he doesn't expect anyone to ever hear these words. He plans to record many hologram videos and just reflect on his time as a Jedi. Anakin smiled with pure relief and joy. It wasn't a living version of Obi-Wan, but it was still him. And Anakin looked inside of the file, finding that there were hundreds of recordings saved in here. It was a journal from Obi-Wan, and it was exactly what Anakin needed. And Anakin turned back to the doorway, remembering that something or someone had led him here. He could only hope that somehow Obi-Wan was watching him from beyond. Anakin would take the file out of here, sealing the door behind him and leaving without a trace back to his room. Anakin would plug the journals into his own hologram player, listening to Obi-Wan ramble on and on about all sorts of things, and it would just allow Anakin to fall back asleep much quicker. This was a version of Obi-Wan that Anakin rarely saw, almost like a behind-the-scenes version, where Obi-Wan allowed himself to be more relaxed and just speak whatever was on his mind, knowing this journal was solely for himself, and perhaps for someone after he dies. And this audio journal would be a turning point for Anakin. He was not slated to return to battle for a few days, and Ahsoka was once again assigned to a Padawan group for the day. So, Anakin began working on something for himself, a sort of mobile audio player that he could put over his ears and just listen to whenever he wants, like a headset, only wired and smaller. And Anakin would find that he and Obi-Wan were more alike than he ever really knew. Both of them were more human than most Jedi, not in their physical forms, but in their mental forms. Obi-Wan had many doubts, he just hid them, and Anakin would hear his reflections after battles, memories spoken aloud so they wouldn't rot inside of his head. There were entries about Qui-Gon, full of reverence and quiet grief, about how faith in the Force doesn't always mean certainty, rather just commitment. There were recordings about Satine that hurt Anakin the most, where Obi-Wan admitted that loving her never made him weaker, only more aware of what the galaxy could cost. Anakin learned just how close Obi-Wan came to leaving the Order for her, and he knew Obi-Wan died just after seeing his love die in front of him. It was heartbreaking, but Anakin would listen to more of them every night. There were lessons in here from Obi-Wan, as he suspected Anakin, or some other young Jedi, may eventually find this journal, and from here, the Clone Wars would only get uglier. Anakin and Ahsoka were sent into the Outer Rim sieges that would grind on for months, each campaign more desperate than the last, with no end to the war in sight. Villages erased, clones and Jedi pushed into exhaustion, and often into death. Victories would come that felt hollow by the time the smoke cleared, and through it all, Anakin led with Ahsoka by his side, the men following them without question. But every battle made the empty space without Obi Wan seem louder. But Obi Wan was still always there, in the recordings. In one of the recordings, Obi Wan talked about command, about how a general's real duty isn't always just to win, but to make sure the soldiers truly survive. Even throughout this war, Anakin would carry that with him, and the Outer Rim sieges were forcing Padme to become a distant partner, as she and Anakin had less and less time to speak with each other. But he still had Ahsoka, and because of what the two of them saw on Mandalore, the Force echo of Sidious killing Obi-Wan, the two of them would work extremely hard to uncover any possible clues about the mysterious Dark Lord. When the temple bombing happens, the two of them would be deep undercover on Nal Hutta, moving through criminal syndicates, false identities, chasing whispers of Sidious that always seemed to dissolve at the edge of any revelation. The only upside to yet another failed lead was that they were not called back to go over the temple bombing, and in turn, Ahsoka would never be expelled from the Order. This would matter the most when the inhibitor chip inside of Five's mind would malfunction. They were fighting a battle for Ringo Vinda when Fives killed General Tiplar. When Fives was taken down and sent to Kamino, it would be Ahsoka that would go with him. Ahsoka would spend most of her time on Kamino with Shaak Ti, as the two of them would talk about the Force, the Jedi, the clones, and Ahsoka would find Master T to be quite intriguing, different than any other Jedi. She was compassionate, emotional, and still grounded in the Jedi way, maybe most similar to someone like Kenobi in a way. But as time went by on Kamino, Clone Trooper Fives would uncover something new about the clones that was kept secret from the Jedi. He found the inhibitor chips, and because Ahsoka was on this world with him, Fives did not panic. He calmly brought the information to Ahsoka, knowing she could be trusted unlike most other people, and together, the two of them would dive deep into the files of the clones. Ahsoka would borrow a key code access panel from Shaak Ti, and this borrowed access code would allow Ahsoka and Fives to bypass all of the lockdown security codes to get deep into the restricted files of the clone troopers. Meanwhile, on Coruscant, Anakin Skywalker was reporting to Palpatine on any updates out of Kamino, but at this point, Fives had only told Ahsoka about the chips. The Kaminoans and Kamino security had no idea that Ahsoka and Fives were digging into the truth of everything. And together, late at night on Kamino, Ahsoka and Fives would dive into the inhibitor chip files, only to discover a full list of executive orders that the clones were expected to execute if commanded. But one of them stuck out more than any other. It was an order labeled Order 66 that would have the clones execute the Jedi. Ahsoka clicked on the file for Order 66, and the entire computer suddenly began shutting down as the room was going into lockdown. Fives clicked a button, downloading the Order 66 file, and he then handed Ahsoka the datapad, telling her to hide. He will face the consequences for this breach. She must get this information into the right hands. Ahsoka would hide behind a nearby console, and the doors opened, revealing Shaak Ti, a clone security squad, and a few Kaminoans, led by Nala Se. But as Ahsoka was hiding, she continued looking into the file, and she found something haunting. Order 66 would cause the clones to turn against the Jedi, and it could only be executed by one man, Chancellor Palpatine. When the room was cleared and Fives was in custody, Ahsoka got back to a communications panel, reaching out for Coruscant. On Coruscant, Anakin would excuse himself from Palpatine's office and go take the message outside. It would be here where the two of them would put the pieces together. Before the war, Dooku had told Obi-Wan that Darth Sidious was in control of the Republic. None of them had believed it, but Ahsoka has now uncovered the executive order that could kill every single Jedi. By word from Palpatine, the man in control of the Republic. Everything flashed inside of Anakin's mind, and he realized that Palpatine would have great motive for killing Obi-Wan if he hoped to continue bringing Anakin to his side. Anakin would thank Ahsoka, and he would enter back into the office, and Ahsoka could only hope that Anakin knew what he was doing. Anakin would enter back into the room, and Palpatine could feel the change in Anakin. Something had gone terribly wrong. Anakin didn't waste any time. He asked Palpatine if he enjoyed killing Obi-Wan as much as Anakin is going to enjoy destroying him. The shift in the Force would tell Anakin that he was correct. Palpatine is Sidious. A red blade would snap to life, and in just seconds, the office was echoing with the sound of their blades. Glass shattering, statues collapsing, Sidious fighting with an anger as he knew his plans could fall apart at any second. The duel tore into the hallway. Sidious would taunt him with Obi Wan's death, telling Anakin how much he did enjoy it. The anger would surge from Anakin, and Sidious would exploit it. With a blast of power, he hurled Anakin through a wall. Anakin hit the floor hard, breath torn from his chest, vision swimming, his lightsaber out of reach, the Force feeling very far away in that moment. And Palpatine decided that Anakin would be kept captive to watch the Jedi and the Republic burn, as he can do nothing about it. But, lying there, broken, shaking, Anakin's hand would drift to his robe. He needed Obi-Wan to be with him, so Anakin would take the audio device that he created and calmly put it to his ears. Obi-Wan's voice suddenly filled his ears, and it was a gentle entry into the audio journal. It was one where Obi-Wan spoke about the future, imagining a galaxy where the Sith are gone, and the Jedi can finally stop being soldiers. He talked about rebuilding, not just systems, but people, about Anakin, saying he wants to see a day where Anakin can live the life that he truly wants. And Obi-Wan admitted in the journal that he knows it will all someday come down to Anakin, and he knows, deep within himself, that Anakin will make the right choice, and he will be the one to strike down the Sith. And in the office, Sidious was turning on his communicator. It was early for Order 66, but so be it. Anakin's betrayal would be the framework for the massacre of the Jedi. But Sidious then felt something in the Force. It was an awakening, and he turned to find Anakin back on his feet. Something in him had changed. Sidious felt real fear, and Sidious threw everything at him. But Anakin met all of it with control, advancing step by step. He would break through the Sith Lord's lightning, driving him backwards, and the Chosen One would deliver the final blow to the man who murdered Obi-Wan Kenobi and poisoned the galaxy. When it was over, Anakin stood alone in the wreckage. Obi-Wan's voice was still playing softly in his ears, and Anakin turned to the activated communicator, turning it to a galactic broadcast. And Anakin would detail the truth for everyone to hear, and within weeks, Dooku and Grievous would be abandoned by the Separatist Senate for working with Palpatine. Within a month, the two of them were taken down. Their resources dwindled, allowing the war to come to an end, with Padme taking a lead in negotiations. Rebuilding was slow, but necessary, and the Jedi would step away from their roles as generals, returning to being mediators, healers, and their temples would become places of refuge again, instead of command centers. The Senate restructured, with entire committees dissolved, replaced by planetary coalitions, meant to prevent power from ever pooling so dangerously. Clones were given choices in their lives, and Ahsoka would take the lead on this, as she was trusted by every clone. Some were returning home to Kamino, others settling down on worlds that they helped to liberate, finally allowed to be more than soldiers. And late on a quiet evening after spending a day with Padme and Ahsoka, upon learning that Padme was pregnant, Anakin returned to the holocron, wishing he could share this news with Kenobi. But today, Anakin just let the Force guide him to a certain recording from Kenobi. In this one, his voice would be hesitant, stripped of humor, almost unsure of itself. Obi-Wan spoke about Satine, and then he admitted something he never truly allowed himself to confirm. There was a boy on Mandalore, Corky Kryze. He had a lineage that never quite made sense. Obi-Wan said he chose not to pursue the truth during the war, and if the war ever came to an end, perhaps he will go to Satine and ask for the truth, wondering if this boy could be his son from a time before war. Anakin knew that Obi-Wan had given everything to protect the future, and now that peace was restored, Anakin decided he would go to Mandalore and he would find out the truth. If Obi-Wan has a son, then the boy deserves to know his father. These recordings, this holocron, it would go to the boy, as Anakin was ready to move on. And folks, that is our story for today. One I enjoyed quite a lot, and every time I do an Obi-Wan Anakin style story, it is the most enjoyable type of story. Not sure what it is, it's just something about their, fun relationship, interesting relationship, brotherly relationship that's fun to write about. So, as always, I hope you guys enjoyed this one. I don't know, the recording part, I thought it was fun. Introduce like an audio journal on Tatooine. I think it's canon that Obi-Wan ended up making a journal anyway, so I thought, what if we just take that and instead of like Luke getting it, we give it to Anakin? And yeah, I really enjoyed that, so hope you guys did as well. I thought it was fun to use it as the motivation for having Anakin win in the end, and yeah, let me know what you guys want to see next. Let me know if you want a part 2 to this. Could be interesting with quirky Anakin, maybe. Appreciate you guys. Let me know, and I'll see you in the next video.